Welcome on ENTSO-E to the third webinar of the Business Network for Innovation Storage as a Flexibility Tool, and I'm very happy to hand over to Norela Constantinescu. Norela is the lead in ENTSO-E on research and development since 2014 and previously worked for the European Commission. Norela, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne. Welcome to everybody on this webinar dedicated to storage. I am pleased to introduce you this network for innovation, our concept, which we developed together with different stakeholders from the industry, research, as well as other institutions. Its aim is to ensure the energy transition with a business perspective. So this is a webinar in a row. We discussed today storage. We will have other webinars later on. The next one will be in March. And it's going to be dedicated to dynamic line rating. And I hope that I will manage to put the slides on the screen. Otherwise, I have to talk just like this. And just one moment. Sorry for this inconvenience. Yeah,
hello, everyone. I was kicked out, but now I'm here.
Hello.
Let's check that. So now I think you see the screen, and I'm going to go forward. Okay, so let's go first into defining the framework. This webinar, it's of course organized around the flexibility needs, and the introduction is going to be made based on input from the International Energy Agency. So of course this is a source for flexibility, and it's related mainly to the development of the renewable sources in different countries, of course in Europe, but also worldwide. In Europe, we are quite much at a degree where we need actually the use of new technologies as well or technologies of renewables. Countries such as Denmark, Germany, Italy, because of their geographical condition and because of their energy mix policy, they developed a quite high penetration of renewables. Looking at the different technologies and the different application as regards the time frames, we can see that actually the storage classes can be used in different time frames and different locations, being at the local level or being at transmission level. Further on, I would like to introduce you a little bit the TSO perspective regarding flexibility sources, services, and products. When talking about the flexibility, so we look at the needs of the system. This is mainly related to the frequency control. We can also look, of course, at the grid services, and here we have non-frequency ancillary services as well as congestion management, and of course services into the markets. The technologies such as storage, but other technologies such as the ones coming from the digital sector, the demand response can enable actually the use of different technologies to fulfill and to provide the flexibility needs. Of course, we have to combine with the markets, and the market design and the products which will be developed are, of course, important. Talking a little bit about the products, the storage as technology, for instance, the batteries, they can provide flexible ramping up and down products. The frequency control can be also ensured by the storage, or storage can be combined with the existing assets, for instance, the grid, and can ensure actually deferred investments in the system. Now going a little bit into the geographical reality of Europe and potentially future developments and the use of storage, we can maybe see, or we will see in the future, different patterns. Normally, the flexibility needs daily are driven by the development of the photovoltaic, and this will be a kind of short-term storage. The wind will require the development of storage from the point of view of a time frame on a weekly base, and then annual flexibility will be driven by seasons. That the flexibility needs depend on the characteristic of the countries, depend on their energy policy mix, and of course then a tailored portfolio of technologies will ensure these flexibility needs. I will just make a teaser into the storage technology as such, because the speakers which join us today will talk about this. So we see actually learning curves. Of course, the most used technology today in Europe is the hydro pump storage, but lithium-ion batteries, they have seen their cost divided by 6 in the last 10 years, so with a learning curve of almost 20%. So some examples from our members, so the transmission system operators for electricity. Of course, Norway, it's in a way the hydro pump reservoir of Europe, and they are supplying mostly of their capacity, which is reaching almost 120 terawatt hours today. But the new technologies are coming into place, and we have TSOs which have tested, for example, the batteries, either through demonstrators, like it was the case of Terna, so with the condition from the point of view of the regulation, but other TSOs like National Grid, which applies the third party procurement, and of Zonan today, and Swiss Grid, RT, Red Electrica, and LS. However, the regulatory framework says today that the TSOs cannot own the storage facilities, except if there are certain regulatory agreements at the level of the national, at the level of the country. And I will like to end up by actually telling you coming conferences, InnoGrid. I hope that it's coming up on the screen. So InnoGrid, which is going to concentrate on the innovation, which we do it together with the DSO Association, and we will focus this year on power platforms on RISE. So we will see how the physics are connecting with the digits, and then later on in the year. So this is going to be on 13, 14 of May, and we hope that you will join us also physically during that conference. Turning the year with Copenhagen on 8th, and we will celebrate the 10 years anniversary of ENTSO-E on 20 and 13 of November in Finland. So now with this, I pass the word back to Suzanne.
Many thanks, Norina. Many thanks for a comprehensive overview on what kind of sources we have today on storage for lithium-ion, but also on hydro that is sometimes neglected in the hype of fast learning technologies in storage. These speakers that are going to present their views on storage, let me start to introduce them. Michael Lippert, he is working for Saft. Saft is a Paris-based company, and he is the marketing and business development manager for energy storage at Saft, being at once the vice president of ENTSO-E, which is the European Association for Storage of Energy in Brussels. We also have Felix Demski. Felix is the vice president strategy of Sonnen, and Sonnen is the leading manufacturer of networked home storage system, the famous HOMS. And Sonnen's products allow the customers to produce, to store, to share their energy. So it's enabling customers in line with the clean energy package, and they install some 40,000 battery systems already worldwide. And then we have Hans-Wolf von Köller. Hans-Wolf is the authorized representative of the managing board of STEAG, and he's the head of energy policy. Wolf von Köller is since 2014 and represents STEAG, which is a Rhenania-Westphalia-based company, and Saarland in Berlin and in Brussels, and was previously the head of corporate development. These three distinguished speakers all have deep insights and cases to present from storage in their respective companies and environments. And I invite you now to listen first to Michael Lippert, who will present the facts, the figures, and also some use cases on energy storage of Saft. And of these, I invite you to listen to three speakers first. You can feel free, please, to send us your questions. We have more than 160 participants in today's webinar. Send your questions, and then in the end of these three presentations, we will have time for discussing. You will be able to, and I will also ask some general questions such as, should storage be done by the market or by a more regulated environment? So Michael, thank you for being here. Michael Lippert, very happy to listen to you now.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for the nice introduction, Susanne, and for giving us the opportunity to speak here. As you announced, I will talk with two hats, in fact. In the beginning, more on the facts and figures from a European perspective, as I'm have the honor as being one of the vice presidents of the ENTSO Association, and later on I will give some more soft perspective on a couple of use cases. So I hope you can see my screen well. First, a couple of words on ENTSO, the association. Well, it's a Brussels-based association led by about 40 members with a mission to support the development and deployment of all energy storage technologies in Europe. And in fact, the first figure I would like to share with you is the fact that in the recently published Clean Energy for All Europeans package, there were 135 mentions of energy storage, whereas in its predecessor document, it was about 0. So this doesn't, on the one hand, translate the growing importance of energy storage in our energy policy in Europe, but it also, I must humbly say, translate to a certain extent the work we are doing at EASE. If you want more detailed information, in particular on the importance of the clean energy package with regards to storage, we organize a seminar on the 22nd of May on this topic in particular. Well, now more figures on the energy storage market as such in Europe. We have here some market studies coming from ENTSO-E, and you can see that, say, in 2018, 2019, we are around 1 gigawatt hour of energy storage deployed annually in Europe. On a market that is growing by 40 to 50% in volume per year over the past years, and with about more than 50%, close to 60% of this being front of the meter, so yeah, you may say on the utility side, and another half on what we call behind the meter, mainly dominated by residential. You also know that most of these deployments in the recent years are going to lithium-ion technology, which dominates, and in particular due to its synergy with the deployment of batteries for electric vehicles. Now the question is, what are the perspectives? And they are still somewhat uncertain, in particular for what concerns Europe. If we take over these figures a moderate growth of, say, 20%, we will end up with an annual market of about 2 gigawatt hours in the middle of the next decade. Whereas other institutes, for example, Bloomberg in particular, forecasts the annual deployment of energy storage in Europe to about 15 gigawatt hours by 2025. And they predict that with the decreasing price of energy storage technologies, we will see a massive penetration, in particular for peaking and for energy shifting applications. Now there is still a level of uncertainty about these figures, as I said. In particular, if you look at the worldwide market on this, compared to the US and to Asia, in these figures, Europe right now remains relatively small, or the smaller part. Just to give you the reference, in worldwide, we consider about or close to 9 gigawatt hours of energy storage deployed last year, and with a forecast, again, I'm referring here to Bloomberg, of about 50 gigawatt hours by 2025. Well, nevertheless, on a more long-term view, we know that we will need a storage in Europe, and that's the vision in any case of the European 2050 long-term strategy document published in November 2018, which translates the avenues to realize the targets of the Paris Agreement. The chart you can see here shows different scenarios on how to reach a fully decarbonized power generation in Europe, which includes a share of variable renewables in the range of 80 to 85%. And clearly, you see we will need to substantially increase our capacity to store electricity over the year from a 2030 level of about from a today's level of about 30 terawatt hours of electricity that are stored per year, in a 80% greenhouse gas reduction scenario, where we will need to multiply this by a factor of close to 10 in the future. You can also see that in these scenarios, pumped hydro remain a basis of storage technologies, but batteries will play a significant role. Yes, we can come to and talk about the different storage technologies. You can see that we separate 5 major families: chemical, electrochemical, electrical, mechanical, and thermal storage. By the way, if you want further description on these, they are available on the EASE website. But we know that whereas we have today in Europe about 45 gigawatt of pumped hydro installed, the market is right now focusing on batteries, which means in particular intraday storage applications. On the long run, we will also need daily or seasonal storage, which will then call for more bulk technology like thermal storage, power to gas, power to X, or CAES, for example. On the application side, again, I will not be able to go into the 37 categories of applications here, but as Noreila already said, we can distinguish between applications that are linked to generation of power or globally to bulk services. We can look at ancillary services, which means services that help the grid to be operated and to remain stable, like in particular frequency control. We can look at services that support infrastructures in transmission and distribution grids. And we can look at behind the meter applications, storage that is installed at residential, commercial, or industrial places for peak shaving and for, in particular, self-consumption. But you see there, just on the behind the meter side, there are more than 7 or 8 different applications we can distinguish. A word, of course, on cost, as you have, I mean, you know, and you have already seen, globally storage costs are decreasing, and they are decreasing with economies of scale and the level of maturity. In this chart, you see on the yellow dots, for example, lead acid, and the green ones are pumped hydro. Obviously, these are relatively mature technologies, and even with increasing volume deployed, there's little perspective, according to this study I've showing here, to achieve further cost reductions. In comparison to this, less mature or maturing technologies like the orange nickel metal hydride or the blue lithium ion have made progress, major cost reduction progress over the past years. Now, what you can see also, however, is that there is not one single lithium ion cost curve. We need to make a difference between the triangles, which are here the battery modules for electronics, for example, compared to the dots, which are more modules or packs. Well, what I want to express is when we are comparing different cost curves, we need to look at different levels of maturity of the technology, the possibility still to realize economies of scale, which are given for some of the technologies or not for others. We also need to compare system scope and definition. A single lithium-ion battery for electronic device is not the same thing than a pack for an electric vehicle, which is a DC battery pack, and which is again not the same scope than an AC to AC turnkey energy storage system for stationary purposes, which includes a number of other devices. And of course, the purpose as such is to be looked at, whether we have seconds, minutes, hours, or weeks of energy storage, of course, has an impact on pricing. And to be a little bit more practical and concrete, I have put on the bottom of this slide a projection for lithium-ion utility scale turnkey energy storage systems. And you can see for comparison between a 2-hour and a 4-hour discharge. On the bottom, you have the battery rack, which is the modules and BMM. They are slightly in this projection, which I've taken from EHS for 2020. They are slightly above $200 per kilowatt hour. But depending then on the discharge duration, you have to add on top on this balance of system components, AC components, engineering procurement and construction and developments that that go up to close to 500 for the 2-hour or close to $350 per kilowatt hour for the 4-hour system. With this being said, on the figures, I would like to come to a couple of use cases, and now I switch more to the SAFT perspective. Well, the fundamental and traditionally most widespread family of use cases is energy storage in association in association with other generation modes, let it be diesel or photovoltaic, providing services to an electricity system that are traditionally or provided by conventional systems. So you see an overview here. We are talking about black start, we are talking about ramping, we are talking about frequency response or spinning reserves, or even islanding. There is a multitude of these applications. One of the examples I have chosen here comes from Bolivia. This is a large 8-megawatt microgrid in the rainforest. It is based traditionally on 10 megawatts of diesel generation, plus 5 megawatt of photovoltaic. And on this, we have added a 2-megawatt battery storage, which provides spinning reserves to the entire grid, so ensuring the grid's resiliency and stability and frequency. And in the same time, it optimizes the diesel operation, avoiding diesels to run up and down, with, as a result, a very good reliability and resiliency of the system. It is running since 2014, and the possibility to switch off permanently to diesels, which saves about 2 million liters of diesel per year. We have multiple examples in SAFT and of course in the world, in particular on islanding or weak grid systems, where we combined energy, very often battery energy storage systems, with various methods of renewable and conventional power generation, providing services to the grid in a multi-application scenario. A more future-looking thing are applications to defer grid investments, basically to cope with peak power problems, and as an alternative to draw or to install additional power lines or power equipment in the system. Obviously, the use of an energy storage system here would only be limited to a certain amount of time, to certain periods of the day or even of the year. And in order to have a business case, the storage device would need to be used for different purposes at different parts of the day. A practical future example of this you may have heard of is the Ringo demonstrator system that RTE is planning to build in France. And it is based on the little schematic you can see here, and which you can see in more details on YouTube. The idea is to transport via a virtual power line, represented by 2 battery storage systems, a high varying amount of renewable generation. In this case, for example, if renewable generates 130 megawatt, but there is a part of the line that can only carry 100 megawatt, well, you would store an excess of 30 megawatt in one battery on the left-hand side, and simultaneously, so without interfering on energy markets, you would unstore the same amount of energy on a second battery, so as to provide the full 130 megawatt in a timely manner to this town. The information I have put here are publicly available from RTE. I mentioned this is a project that RTE is planning to be realized with 3 lithium-ion battery systems of 12 megawatt and 24 megawatt hours. And it's supposed to be operational in 2020, I think. I come to my last example and to the end of my presentation, an example for behind the meter storage in an industrial site. This is one of our first realizations coming from Spain. It's a factory that has installed a photovoltaic panel on its roof, and it has installed a 50 kilowatt hour, 200 kilowatt lithium ion battery. What does it do? It stores surplus photovoltaic generation, because in this case, there is no business to sell this energy to the market. It doesn't give any significant remuneration anymore. The battery also helps to reduce the peak demand and therefore to lower the peak electricity tariffs, and it also provides some compensation of reactive power. You find again a combination of applications, and with as a result, 100% of the photovoltaic energy is self-consumed. The peak load is reduced by 20%, and the global energy bill for the user is reduced by 8% in this very example. Well, my time is over. I hand back my presentation to Susanne, I think. Yes, and I thank you very much for your questions.
Okay, many thanks, Michael, for this presentation. And as a German like you, yeah, I also remind that Saft has nothing to do with the German Saft, yeah, what means juice, even if it would be nice applied to batteries, just for the joke. So many thanks for this presentation. And we go now directly to our next speaker, Felix Dembski. Felix is going to put a new regulatory Europe and some examples of the work of Sonnen, knowing that Sonnen works also with some of the ENTSO-E members. Felix, the word is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Susanne. A quick disclaimer up front. My laptop just died 2 hours before this webinar. Of course, we're N-1 redundant here at Sonnen, but I'm on a replacement laptop. So if there's any technical difficulties or anything like that, dear team ENTSO-E, please feel free to take over and at any given moment. All right, I'm going to give you a quick introduction into storage as a flexibility tool, and show you some projects we're actually working on at the moment, and then give you some sort of an outlook on the future regulatory environment on this one. All right, as a quick introduction on what we do. At the heart of everything we do is our storage product, which is the Sonnen battery, which you can see on the top left corner. It is a lithium iron phosphate battery. It has a capacity of 3.3 kilowatt and a storage capacity of up to 16 kilowatt hours. And our customers typically combine those with a solar panel in their home, and we shipped some 40,000 of those worldwide so far. All right, people use these Sonnen batteries first and foremost to increase self-consumption. So if you only have a solar panel on your roof, that will only cover 1/3 of your electricity consumption. The reason being is that your consumption typically will take place at night, and your solar panel, of course, produces electricity during the day. So with these storage devices, the customers typically rack up their self-consumption rate to 2/3. However, the remaining third still has to come from somewhere else. So somebody has to produce it, and somebody has to deliver it over the grid. And so what we did then is combine the batteries of our customers into a large network, which we call the Sonnen community. You can see an example on the upper right-hand side. So in this community, the way it works is basically that customers provide each other with electricity. So if you live in northern Germany and the sun doesn't shine, we will provide you with electricity from the solar panels of the customers in the south. And if the weather is the other way around, we would do it the other way around. So this creates a significantly independent network of batteries and solar panels all over Germany at this point. If you ask yourselves, what do we do in the darkest, most windless days of winter when there's just no renewable energy available to anyone on the system? Well, then we buy in the wholesale market like everyone else. The third thing we did then is we asked ourselves, in a system, electricity system, which is largely based on renewables, what's the most valuable thing? And the most valuable thing is flexibility. And there's nothing more flexible than a vast distributed network of batteries. So what we did then is combine those batteries into a virtual power plant to then use that flexibility in the virtual power plant to provide grid services to grid operators. As an example, you can see a distribution of our batteries in Germany on the lower left-hand corner. And the fourth thing we're now doing is something which creates kind of a headache for more distribution system operators, which is the integration of electric vehicles. As you all know, there's a certain fear that if they all charge at 7 o'clock in the afternoon when people come home, it's going to cause stress to the grid. We have a solution now where the customer basically plugs in his electric vehicle, because our customers actually have quite a lot of electric vehicles, and they hand the charging over to us. So all they do is open their app and say, I want my car back fully charged tomorrow morning at 8. I don't care how you do it, Sonnen, as long as it's full by 8. And then we can integrate that into a virtual power plant and optimize the entire charging process, optimize for self-consumption from their own roof, for example, but also have the opportunity to react to price signals by the DSO, where such price signals can be delivered in the regulatory framework. Okay, so this is basically what we do, and just to get everyone on the same page, and now talk about storage as a flexibility option. Why do we need that? Well, first of all, for us, it's very important to say that we don't see an actual rivalry between storage and grid expansion. Often when you talk about storage in public forums, people will raise their hand and say, well, isn't grid expansion the cheaper flexibility option? And we don't think that there's actually a rivalry between the two. I think there's things grid expansion can achieve which storage cannot achieve, and there's stuff storage can achieve which grid expansion cannot achieve. So I think we think in the energy system of the future, it's very important to have both. To have a very, very powerful grid, and then to use storage where it's useful to make sure the system as a whole is cost efficient and also involves the customers as well. So we don't see any rivalry between grid expansion and storage as a flexibility option. We also believe that regardless of what grid operators are going to do, we're just going to see a huge uptake of solar and storage due to the active customer model, which will then automatically give us the question whether or not we should use this flexibility option to benefit the system as a whole. Just to give you an idea, the forecast by the German regulator is that we're going to see 10 gigawatts of really small home storage units by 2030. And the German regulator, I would say, is rather conservative, usually in their assumptions. And it would be rather stupid not to make use of these resources for the system as a whole. And the other thing we're going to see is, and why the active customer model with solar and storage is so important, we believe that the next step in the energy transition will be product driven. So far in the energy transition, most of it was about generation. But if we look at the other sectors which have now to become decarbonized, those are product driven. Heating is semi-product driven, but mobility, for example, is highly product driven. So you will need to engage much more with customers to actually make them change the technologies they use. In very simple terms, no one has ever bought an efficient car, I believe. So if you want people to switch towards electric mobility, you have to offer them something which gets them involved with these technologies and with the energy transition as a whole. And there, solar and storage are very interesting door openers to do that. And also, why is storage as a flexibility option interesting? Well, we still see high learning rates for battery cell technologies. Michael has shown that in his presentations. So, and if you look back at solar, at the learning rates we've seen there, and if you look at the predictions, how much ramp up we're going to see in battery cell production, I think we think there's still potential for learning and cost decreases in the cell technology field. All right, just to give you a quick rundown what we already do with storage. Our virtual power plant was just certified to provide primary frequency control, or FCR, in the TenneT control area. So we were able to bundle up a few hundred batteries into a 1 megawatt block, and then ran that through the pre-qualification process by TenneT.
Interesting case where Sonnen and TSO TenneT. Felix, I took over. You can come back.
Yes, I'm
Felix?
still there. Yes.
Felix?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
Trying to help Sonnen out, and I just started to present on VPP. So you should maybe continue now. The VPP for FCR.
Okay.
Okay. Can you
please.
continue then on this example?
Yes. Can you still hear me? Susanne?
We hear you very well, Felix.
Okay. All right. So
yes, ich höre dich sehr gut.
Excellent. So the virtual power plant was just certified for FCR. It was very fruitful cooperation with TenneT. It took us 2 years to do it, but we finally did it in December. And just to give you an understanding of how difficult it actually is to integrate something like decentralized storage into the regulatory framework, which was once designed for large-scale power plants, we actually had to hand in some 20,000 pages of forms in the qualification process. Not to TenneT, typically to the DSOs involved. All right. The other large-scale project we do with TenneT is one where we try out with 2 things basically, which is using distributed storage for redispatch, and at the same time testing blockchain. I think you all know that there's a lot of talk about blockchain, which is the future, and there's a lot of talk about redispatch, which is a pain to TSOs at the moment. We just wanted to look if we could combine the 2 and get a minimal viable product there, to look if we can combine the 2. And so what we did is with TenneT experiences congestion typically north-south in Germany. So there's too much wind power in the north and there's not enough power in the south. And what we did then is take batteries in the north and take batteries in the south. And if there's a redispatch event, then TenneT will order the batteries in the north to charge and the batteries in the south to discharge. And this is all done on a platform which is entirely blockchain based. So the orders and the requests and the settling, etc., is all done on a blockchain solution by IBM. We used a minimal viable product approach. It's also important. We didn't take too many batteries, so if it doesn't work, it doesn't crash TenneT's system. And I think we're going to publish a little report on the results very soon. We're in the last stages there. You can learn quite a lot about redispatch and blockchain in that respect, regarding to the regulatory environment for both. So the regulatory environment for the pricing of redispatch assets is very interesting with regards to distributed assets. and also stuff around data protection, data access, etc. with a blockchain isn't as trivial as people sometimes think. Okay, but just so you get an idea, the whole project was done without adding any hardware or anything like that. So it runs on the IT systems which are already there, and it showed us how blockchain is actually able to provide secure and trusted transactions. And if you compare that to the old pre-qualification process, for example, where we had to end in 20,000 physical pages of forms, you can see there's a lot of potential for digitalization in that process. And the last thing, just what we kicked off is with a DSO, actually also to test a blockchain solution. We work with a DSO in Eastern Germany, which has too much local wind power, and he has to curtail wind power quite a lot. Because it will take a few more years until all new power lines will be built to transport that wind power to Western and Southern Germany. And we thought, like, how about we store some wind power in the batteries of our owners? In that respect, also very interesting, the effect that batteries which customers buy to store solar power usually have a lot of spare capacity in the winter when there's not that much sun. And that's typically when the wind production peaks show up much more often than in summer. And again, we test blockchain, not because it's a hype, but because it allows us to attach properties to kilowatt hours. So the blockchain solution will allow us to actually certify the origins of the kilowatt hours we store there. So the idea would be that we can prove to regulators or to any other market participants that the electricity we stored during times of excess wind power was actually meant to be stored for the DSO. So we act as a storage garage for the DSO. And this would then make pricing of this service to the DSO much easier than in a regular metering environment. So we're testing out these origins of green origins of kilowatt hour certifications with a blockchain solution. Okay, this is a quick overview of products. We have many more products in the pipeline there. Very interesting stuff, I think, where we can test out how the spare capacity of what started off as a consumer product can actually then be used to the benefit of the whole system. And to give you an outlook, unless Susanne intervenes, there's actually very interesting developments in the clean energy package now. And that's three things. The first is that in the future, also DSOs must draw up a network development plan. So far, it's usually been TSOs. And if you think, is it a storage? Is it an option? Is it not an option? If you're a DSO in the future, you actually have to show in your network development plan that you considered storage as a flexibility option over grid expansion. And you have to subject your network development plan to a public consultation. So all DSOs of a certain size will have to consider storage as a flexibility option in the future. Also, what's very interesting, as Susanne mentioned earlier, TSOs and DSOs will not be allowed to manage storage facilities or own them unless there's really, really tight exceptions. So this idea of providing storage as a service to the DSO and TSO will grow much more in the future, and market participants will look for possibilities to monetize spare capacity in storage facilities of owners, of individual owners. And the last and maybe most important thing, which people sometimes overlook in the market design directive, is for a long time in many regulatory environments there was a problem that typically if you stored electricity, it was double charged with taxes and charges and fees, etc. Because in many regulatory environments, storage doesn't actually exist. Now, you store electricity and counts as consumption, so it's taxed and charged once, and then you inject it back into the grid, And then, of course, it's already very expensive electricity because it comes in Germany, for example, with a 200 euro per megawatt tax and charge up front. And then you inject it into the grid, someone else at the other end of the grid consumes that electricity and pays all those charges and fees again. So there's a double charging there. And in the future, if you use your storage device to provide grid services to a grid operator, then you will no longer be double charged. So that's interesting, and that opens up the spare capacity of behind the meter storage facilities much better to DSLs and TSLs. All right, so that was a quick run through. So storage as a flexibility option is very interesting, technically speaking, and also now in the regulatory environment. If you want to look at where these storage facilities are located, you can go to globe.zon.de and contact us at any time. With that, I hand over back to Susanne.
Yes. Many thanks, Felix, for this very interesting overview. And just to say, you mentioned the number 10 gigawatts of storage to be installed in Germany, for example. Yeah, this is roughly 5%. Today we are at 207 gigawatts in Germany installed. Yeah, interesting to see this development. Yeah. So now we have half an hour left. I would like now Hans Wolf to come in. Hans Wolf, 10 minutes, not more, because we want to use also some time for the discussion in the end. So you have the word.
So yeah, hello to everybody. Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fine. Hello to everybody. It's the first time that I'm doing a webinar, so I'm quite excited about this opportunity. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for being the customer now here in the in this webinar. Because we as STEAG, as you can see here on the my first title slide, we are operating a battery system in several places, and it looks like this. There are some data about this on this page. 6 large-scale battery systems, and with 15 megawatts each at sites of power plants, and we are have experienced quite a lot of hours now operating, very content with the results, and happy about our investment. It's a bigger one, with, as you can see here, it's 120 megawatt hours in total, and where they are really doing fine. My job now is not only just to look on the customer side, but also to make some statements about where to put the flexibility in the system, because we do think, or we are convinced, that it is not just a question of a technical question, it is a question of regulation. So not only the installation of renewables is enhanced or enforced by regulation, but also how to implement storage into the grid, and it is quite interesting to see where these storage facilities are working and why they are. Felix has mentioned that there is a customer perspective, a really not an industrial customer perspective, that they want to load their cars by their own homemade electricity. We are of course very interested in buying efficient cars or efficient batteries, because we are trying to serve the needs, for example, with these batteries of the primary controller FCR. You all know much about how this is organized, but this is a product. There is a contract between the TSO side and us as a flexibility producer. And on such a product, we are focused with serving the needs of the grid. And we are, as I would like to state again, convinced that there should be products, not products in a modern manner, or that it's fancy. It just has to be very strictly clear what is the need of the grid, how can it be served by a battery, for example. And this is our question was for part of this discussion to the clean energy package, but hopefully it will happen like Felix had shown, but I don't know in the end. It is really decisive who takes responsibility for the flexibility in the system. This is the headline of this slide. And there are discussions of shifting this role to more to the grid. On the left-hand side, you can see the unbundling version we are sticking to, that the flexibility is delivered by either the customer or the producer, and the grid operator is just caring for the system stability. And of course, therefore, is in the last seconds there is flexibility needed, of course, but not. But it's now really interesting being strict, and we see that there is a development in direction that DSO and TSO maybe not really a storage owner, but halfway owner, if these fully integrated network components, which are exempted or the exemptions are widened or weakened by the in the national lawmaking, if this might be the right expression, then because in the middle you see if the grid operator takes care for a part of the load management, and this is something which is worrying us, then the flexibility is also delivered by the storage. We do not want to have to be the storage garage for the DSO, as Felix just mentioned. We think that there have to be lots of storage garages for that reason, that the DSO is able to manage his grid under the challenges with augmenting renewables in a reliable manner, of course. But it is not just a question of ownership; it's also a question who is saying yes or no to discharging and charging, and this shifting of the role is quite decisive. So as Susanne has told me that I have just 10 minutes, I will jump to the next slide, or just one last sentence to this. We are also convinced that it's a question of innovation, where is the innovation needed? Felix and Michael, you've shown different cases, and all these cases were not probably incentivized by heart or by the grid operators, probably, but by customer interests or by regional needs. And we should discuss really the combination between these needs and the grid and the grid questions. So the question of how to combine the grid with the market will be quite relevant in future. So we have seen quite a lot of examples and use cases for storage already. Interesting is that the most of the batteries which are installed were just in the frequency control market, but there are more ancillary services which could be defined. There could be a market for this in voltage support, backstart capacity, and so on. We do not see that batteries are good for congestion management. This is a theoretically discussion we are facing in Germany, because what will happen with the additional electricity, which is needed for charging in the south and in the north. It should be a question of the market, and so this is on the bottom of the slide. We think that the chances for load management, also for generators or prosumers, consumers, is always a question of the market. So and these are responsible for the congestion management by clever peak shaving. So this picture you can see there this bottom is showing that the battery, of course, can fulfill the job of a kind of a funnel to fulfill market and grid needs. And we were discussing this internally because we were doing quite a lot of R&D about how to use storage in future and in a bigger scale or in a smaller scale. And we were just looking at our wind farm in Brandenburg, and we were just excited that or worried that the capacity, the needed this is a wind park of 43 megawatts, and just in 13 hours per year, the peak was achieved of these wind park. But of course, the grid capacity was needed all year long or reserved. And then I was asking, how about the contract between the wind farm and the grid operator? And there is no, really, there is in Germany, there are different ideas about Europe, of course, but in Germany it's like this, that there's no real contract about limiting the feed-in. Even if the wind farm might have an overcapacity to what is written on I think it's the word is a plug, might feed in also additional kilowatt hours, and so it is not managed really in the combination between the wind farm and the grid, but it is all year long reserved for this farm, or even not, because they are the well-known congestions. And we were discussing how could the system or the feed-in be more system-oriented, and if there is a really limited feed-in or a contract with the wind farm and the grid operator, and for example a limited feed-in of 4 megawatts in this case, about 10%, and then there is an incentive to install the battery at the place of or at the site of the wind farm. There, in the end, the reduced capacity will increase under congestion scenario the renewable feed-in, because there are more capacity for new wind farms in the grid possible, and we can shift under the reign of the wind farm operator the renewable electricity to a later period, and therefore, of course, there is a kind of premium for perpetuating the continuous generation is needed. And so we are quite interested in discussing this under the question how to optimize the grid use, the grid access, and there's certainly just we are just in the beginning of the discussion. So I think there is no rivalry between batteries or storage and grid expansion, but there should be a more partnership, a better partnership between both of those, but on the platform of the unbundling. Thank you. Susanne, are you taking over again?
Thank you very much, Felix, Hans-Wolf, and Michael, and Hans-Wolf, and Michael, and 10 minutes left now.
Muted.
Questions that we got, and that will be answered also by our distinguished speakers, yeah. Some of the questions are in a way outstanding, yeah. And the first question is about what do we assume in terms of being a flexibility tool among the other solutions that we have, demand side response, etc. What's the need for storage in the future? Felix was mentioning these 10 gigawatts. What is the assumption of all of you for the future of storage in the system? That's one question I would like all speakers to briefly address. And then the second question, let's take it as well, and that's the one about storage in a regulated environment, or rather in a market environment. What we see today is that it is in a way in both. It's done without the market and it's done with the market. So I would like to have all speakers come back to these two questions before we stop. First question being future of storage as one of the flexibility tools. Second question, regulated or market environment for storage development. Maybe Norila, you start.
So I hope that you can hear me. It's so storage, of course, it's a flexibility mean among others. And as I have said in the beginning of this webinar, we discussed and focused today more on the batteries maybe, but of course there are other technologies. First of all, the one which is existing and which is covering probably the most of the flexibility needs in Europe is the hydro pump storage. But we have upcoming technologies like power to gas and hydrogen, which less today. I should also say that storage, of course, has features which are helpful for the development of the flexibility services and products which are coming on the market, so driven by ramping up needs up and down. One of the speakers was mentioning the fact that it's for sure driven by the product developments, especially at the customer level. There are other technologies like demand response, which, of course, it's also a source of flexibility. Grids themselves, so the networks, they also are a source of flexibility. And of course, the relationship with the other sectors, like, for instance, the relationship to the gas, the relationship with the electromobility, are, or even with heat, of course, are source of flexibility. Now, coming back to your question, Suzanne, about regulated or market. So, of course, we have the clean energy package. So, from the network operators' point of view, we are in within this framework where there is this provision of actually network operators not being entitled normally to own storage facilities and letting this to the market, except on certain conditions, and this has to be agreed with the regulators, or can be, for instance, tested, as it was the case of Terna, so in Italy, or France, RT in France, which are using this to see the requirements for the system.
Okay, thanks, Norila, for this. What do you think, Michael, on these 2 points? How many gigawatts of storage do you see, let's say 2030, for example, with the now known environment targets with the clean package?
Well, on this question, I would really bounce back and say it depends a lot on what we can achieve together in Europe on the regulatory side and globally in terms of market design. Today, it is clear that the US and Asia have different system design They have different market structures which favor a strong development and a fast development of energy storage, which we can see.
Muted.
And as I mentioned before, the speed at which we can develop storage in Europe, I think, is really depending on whether we get a correct, favorable market design. Favorable in this sense means where all flexibility options, including storage, have a non-discriminatory access to these markets, and these markets need to, of course, also then to be defined. Maybe to come to particularly on your second point, of course, we
Unmuted.
about the clean energy package, and it has been mentioned several times now about the ownership question. Still, for example, what concerns what we would call local flexibilities, so really flexibilities that enable to manage local congestion. There is no market existing today. We do have a market design for frequency regulation, of course. We have energy markets, we have services markets, but there is no fluid market for local flexibility services. So can we come to defining market rules, define a local flexibility products for DSOs, for TSOs, remuneration schemes? As the faster we can achieve this, the better it is. My personal belief is that on the way to mature this in Europe, we will still need some mixed models where, for example, like we do, and as mentioned with Terna and RTE, where the operators have an increased role in getting experience with these devices, how to use them, how to operate, and how to remunerate them. That's my point.
Okay, I'll take over from you, Michael. Well, from our perspective, how does storage fare compared to the other flexibility options? We don't know. I mean, it's the most fast-reacting technology. So technically speaking, it's very, very capable. It can do almost anything you want to have in the electricity system. And the most important point now is to generate a level playing field on these markets for flexibility. And then we will see which technology will prevail in which field. Also, there's no standard flexibility, as you know. So I think we're going to see a very interesting technology mix, depending on, very short-term, long-term, mid-term flexibility, etc. Regarding should it be regulated or market-driven, from our perspective, of course, it should be market-driven. At any point, most likely, as my colleague said, it is also about innovation. I mean, this is about technological innovation, bring the technologies to light, which allows us to get more renewables. So the market-based approach is much better. However, I think the EU struck a very interesting and clever mechanism in the EU Clean Energy Package, where it said basically if a DSO or a TSO has the feeling they need storage, they shouldn't buy it immediately themselves. They should ask the market once, dear market, is there storage as a service out there? And if the market doesn't offer storage as a service, then they can buy their own facilities, which I think makes sense. However, they will have to try to sell those again 5 years later. So I think what we're going to see is either storage as a service, fully market-driven, providing the services to DSOs and TSOs, or DSOs and TSOs actually discovering themselves where they need storage and then phasing that out to the market later on, which will then lead to more market-based solutions in the end. So I think there's a very clever mechanism how markets and regulated grid operators should interact with each other.
Okay, and then Hans Wolf to conclude. Hans Wolf?
Sorry, I've turn off. I got not really a clue about the development of storage. There is huge potential, but at the moment the potential is not going to be used. I'm afraid, because the regulation is not as clever as it is. Just think about 10% of the wind farms in the north of Germany, and this will be 5 gigawatts of batteries, and will it increasingly change the operation of the system in Germany. It would be certainly very helpful, but I don't know if this got a chance. The who is the ownership, I think this was pretty clear what my opinion is on that. This clever mechanism is worrying me, because if you are able to, as a grid operator, to design such a mechanism, there might, and with the chance to invest in the end, there might be an incentive to design it not as attractive for somebody like Stehag or other companies. So there's really this is a backdoor I do absolutely not like in this clean energy package, and this is just focused, or in the beginning was just focused on islands, small islands where there is no. And now these backdoor is pretty big. So I hope that everybody is sticking to the clear distinction. If there is an island, a small something on a hill, it shouldn't be a religious question in these cases. But the principle is weakened by these formulations in the package, and this is absolutely wrong, I'm afraid.
Okay, many thanks to all our speakers, and really many thanks also to more than 100 participants all across this interesting webinar on storage as a flexibility tool. The last point, Hans Wolf, potential of storage. We should certainly not forget about hydro. That is a mature storage technology, but it's not in the money in that sense. You are absolutely right. So I would like to, first of all, encourage once more our speakers to look at those questions that are devoted to their presentations. Please answer them. I would like to invite all of you to the next webinar that takes place on 20th of March and is addressing dynamic line rating, which is one of the innovative technologies for improving the use of the existing grids, considering it's difficult to build new with a lot of public opposition, but also a lot of bureaucratic obstacles to next grids. And I would like to encourage the members of the Business Network for Innovation, that are today more than 100, to send, if you are interested, your interest, to notify us your interest to be a member of what we call in the future a program board. We would like to have some of the members helping us identify interesting topics to the community, and you can be sure that there will be a survey to all members asking what kind of topics you want to see after summer. And here I'm happy to introduce a colleague that just joined us, Laurent Dekani, who will take the lead on setting up this program board and overall lead on this Business Network for Innovation, one of ENTSO-E's activities with the Research and Development Committee. Many thanks to all of you, and have a nice second half of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye-bye, everybody.